Hello, Culture Matters podcast. I'm so excited to introduce you to our guest. Before I do that, here's a quote just for this episode. The beautiful thing about podcasting is it's just talking. It can be funny or it can be terrifying. It can be sweet. It can be obnoxious. It almost has no definitive form. In that sense, it's one of the best ways to explore an idea and certainly much less limiting than trying to express the same idea in stand up comedy. For some ideas, stand up is best, but it's really, really nice to have podcasts as well. Joe Rogan. Our guest today is a leader in the culture of the podcasting world. They've got a background in business and sales and management, but found themselves working through the corporate chain to actually host a great show, the Treasury 101 show, the Treasury 101 Corporate Treasury 101 podcast with their co-host. They're
Correct.
the co-founder of GHA Marketing. Guillaume Jouvencel is here today to educate us on podcast culture. We're very excited because I'm excited. I hope everybody's excited because hello, the Culture Matters podcast. So thanks for coming on the show and shout out to our friend of the show, Zach Carlin, for introducing us.
Zach, thank you so much. Jay, thank you so much for this introduction. Man, it's going to be hard to live up to the expectations set by the quotes, Joe Rogan himself. I'm flattered, but let's do it, man. Let's do it.
Do you remember where you were when you thought we're going to start this podcast? And I asked that because your background in business, finance, very big companies, great companies, Price Waterhouse, and I don't know the other bank, but very, very hundreds of years of
Yeah.
heritage. So where were you, or like what were you doing when you think I'm going to do this?
hmm And it's so funny. So I'm going to try not to bore you out with all the details, but I remember very well where I was. So with my buddy Hussam, so 20, like New Year's Eve of 2021, COVID, right? All our friends are going back home. And we're like, so we both live in Belgium back then. I'm from France, he's from Edinburgh. And we live in Belgium. And we're like, man, what do we do for New Year's Eve? Okay, let's go crazy. Let's take a ticket to the Canaries because that was one of the destinations you could go to if you had the COVID certificate and so on. But like traveling was still hard if it wasn't your home country. Anyway, so we go to Canaries, we spend the New Year's Eve there, and we surf like crazy. We have the best time of our life. And we're like, man, we need to do something together. Like, what do we do? Okay, let's start a podcast. Very little people know that the first podcast was a podcast about climbing. I mean, that was the idea because we're like, yeah, we're going to launch this website and this podcast and this online shop around climbing because we started bouldering at that time. But that's why we were in the Canaries in a little rented home in Lanzarote, the island, for people who know. Where we're like, we're going to launch a podcast, man. That's where we were.
The first thing you did, you got a mic, a computer, what?
So not even so in the previous years I had started a blog about personal development and I
Okay.
had started a podcast, but it wasn't really in the format of a podcast like you're doing right now. But so I had a tie mic, I think that's how we say in English, like something that you can just clip to your tie.
Yeah.
And we've put this this is so funny, we've put this on the MacBook Air that we were using for the recording. And so we started recording episodes for this climbing podcast. We recorded one episode, actually never published. But then we recorded the Corporate Treasury 101 podcast. And after 30
Wow.
episodes about that, we figured out that we weren't using the little microphone that we had put on the top of the laptop. We were using the laptop's microphone because we didn't know anything about podcasts back then. I'm like, that's why the sound is so crap. And we modified that afterwards. So things have
Wow.
changed, as you see, but that's the
Yeah.
beginning of the Corporate Treasury 101 podcast. Yeah.
Wow. Now, first, first of all, our listeners, why take notice to podcasting?
Mhm.
Regardless of profession, is there something to take notice of in your estimation?
Mm. So there is so obviously I'm in the podcast sphere. So when experts about the field say, "Oh yeah, this is what you need to do now," I feel they are a bit biased, obviously, because this is what they do, this is what they are selling. So instead of that, I want to like point out a few data points. The first one is, and it's from a post from Neil Patel, by the way, one of the biggest marketers out there. He released the post like, I think it was beginning of 2024, which was launching a podcast now equals buying Bitcoin in 2012 or launching a blog in 2004. And he's like, but here is why. Here's the data behind it. There are 1 billion blogs on the internet, about 4 million podcasts. I'd say 40% of those are active out there. But yet, since I think it's summer 2023, there has been more researchers and queries for podcasts on Google than blogs. This was back in 2023. And this has kept on, the difference has kept on growing. Yet we still have a billion blogs. Of course, not all of them are active, right? But a billion blogs and 4 million podcasts. And it's like, it's growing. I think the stats recently came out with 50% of the population of the United States listens to a podcast at least every month, whether that's audio or video. Like, from my perspective, podcast has become undeniable. But that's the stats that back it up, in my opinion. So yeah, people should take notice of podcast, 100%.
And am I saying this correctly? Corporate Treasury 101?
You're spot on, man. Yeah.
What was the purpose behind that at first?
Yeah. Man, those are great questions.
Oh,
So
thanks.
funnily enough, we were like, so I had launched a few business ventures that completely failed in the past. And I was like, one of the things that I noticed is that I was every time launching something alone, and it was feeling very lonely. Like, it's in ups and downs. And I was like, okay, I need to do this with somebody. But like, who? Like, when you try to partner with somebody, it's tough to find the right business partner. And Hussam back then was one of my best friends. And I was like, you know what? I feel I could work with this guy, just because he was hardcore, and he's still obviously hardcore. But like, he was working weekends for Procter & Gamble, going to the factory, like working 12, 14-hour shifts. And he was excellent and very smart. So one night we went to eat Pokeball, and I was like, dude, let's start something together. Nothing big. Let's start something to see if we can work together. I want to do something outside of work that is not just, entertainment or whatever. Let's start with something. And the idea of the podcast for bouldering came out. And this is where, after when we went to the Canaries, we're like, okay, we are going to do a podcast about this. But so that's where it came from. And we're like, let's launch something just to see if we can work together, and potentially later on we'll launch something that, that we try to make a living out of. And we're like, okay, the bouldering thing has failed. What do we feel we could stick to and would be useful as well? Because obviously when you see results, it's like, it's much easier to keep on going. And I was like, look, dude, I'm in this space, corporate treasury. I just arrived in it, right? 6 months in consulting. I'm like, I feel there is something lacking here. There is something missing. There is no good, funny, educational resources around that specific theme, which is so niche. And it's like, so corporate treasury, for the ones listening to us, it's a niche in finance that you have. It's a department like reporting to the CFO of a company, but that companies typically don't need before they make around $500 million in revenues a year. So it's very, very niche, and still the departments are very small. So like, no podcast had paid attention to that space just yet. I was like, there is something to be done here. And that's how and why we went all in.
500 million up in sales, report to the CFO. That's a tranche within a business, and you want to speak to that very niche audience.
Exactly. And then the bigger the company, the bigger the department. Yeah.
What are some of the problems that arise in that tranche?
So typically what happens is that, so it can happen a bit earlier, but it's just to have like a rough idea of when it starts. But basically what corporate treasury is going to do is they're going to manage the cash of the company. And they are going to prevent financial risks, or try to mitigate financial risk. Typically, when you, Jay, start selling, I don't know, hats all around the world, right? You're going to sell in different currencies. But those currencies can go up and down. Now you're like, okay, if I lose 0.1% on a $1,000 transaction, that's not a big deal. But the company is dealing with hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of transactions. Then a 1%, 2% shift can mean their whole margin.
Yeah.
So this is where it becomes super important to have somebody who can at least try to mitigate this, because there's always going to be risk. You can de-risk it as much as you can. Some things can happen, black swan events and so on, COVID. But that's the role of the treasurer. So managing the cash, making sure that basically the company stays liquid, that it can pay its employee, that it can pay its suppliers and so on. So fulfill its financial obligation, to become technical. And prevent and mitigate financial risk. That's what a corporate treasury department does.
Well, and now you and your co-host, how would you do the first 50 episodes?
Yeah. How did we do it, or how would we do it now?
How did you do it then?
Yeah. So like, okay, dude. So we did a bit of preparation, right? We were like, okay, Hussam, you're gonna ask me questions as somebody who doesn't know anything about corporate treasury, because I was the one who knew the most, and by the one who knew the most, I was 6 months in, so I just did know like 6 months worth of corporate treasury. But after 10 episodes, we're like, okay, I'm just gonna Google those topics before we hit record. So he was asking me questions, and I was answering, and we were making it a little banter, with little jokes. The OGs will know what I mean with Hussam's Cafe. So we would always take the example of Hussam's Cafe, and the idea was to have a conversation, right? Like that's how we believe the podcast format should be for most of the people, for most of the podcasts. Of course, you can have different styles, but like the exchange between two people that is not super scripted, exactly like we are doing now, Jay. This is where, in our opinion, you get the most value as an audience, right? As a listener, because you want to be part of that conversation between almost two friends and be part of this friendship whilst learning something. That's how we see
Mm,
podcast.
mm.
So for like the content, that's what we would do. And then for the setup, well, as said, it would be very bare bones. We start with, hey, let's first launch the podcast, see if people listen. And if they do, then we can upgrade the settings and so on. I think lots of people just go, like full swing into, oh, I'm going to buy these 300 microphones and this lighting and this decoration, whilst they get 0 downloads. So that's exactly what we would do. What we did, actually.
Is there some type of connection with, the gym, New Year's Eve, people go to the gym, they buy the shoes and they shirt and the shirt.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's like that in American culture.
Man,
New Year's
so
resolution, go to the gym, buy the shoes, buy the shirt, and then
yeah.
it's similar to podcast. People get all the stuff. Is that something you've observed? So can you unpack? I don't know.
So I'm a gym rat. So I love this analogy. And yes, that would be 100% it. And in France, we are no
Holy
different. We have
wow.
exactly that. So it would be New Year's Eve and typically September when you're like back from like summer holidays. People are like, okay, now I'm starting it. This is the too crowded period. And a little bit in April, May, because people are like, okay, I need my summer body, but little do they know that. Little do they know, sorry, that it doesn't happen in 2 months. Anyways, that's another topic. But yeah, that's exactly it. I understand as well, right? People get hyped up. People are like, okay, this is something new. I'm going to invest. I'm going to be like all in. And actually, when you make a financial commitment, you're also like, hey, yeah, if I'm, buy the $150 shoes, I'm going to go to the gym. But that's not what makes you go to the gym. What makes you
Wow.
go to the gym is discipline, not motivation, in my opinion, but discipline, having a plan, and having small wins that get you towards the big win. That's how we go to the gym, in my opinion, and how we get results from it. Exactly like with podcasts. And there is this
Wow.
stat that I love. You interrupt me, Jay, if I go down the rabbit hole too much. But there is this stat that I love, which is 90% of podcasts don't make it past episode 3, and of those who do, 90% of them don't make it past episode 20.
Wait, 3 in a day or 3?
3 total, 3 published,
That's great.
which is crazy. And so you
Wow.
need to release. It's
Three.
crazy. And you need to release. So it's a quote from, I learned it from Chris Williamson from Modern Wisdom, one of the
I
biggest
like that
podcasters
guy.
out there.
Yeah.
And he's our inspiration, by the way. We started the podcast because, or thanks to Chris Williamson.
Wow.
And it's like, you launch a podcast, you keep on going for 21 episodes. You have a top 1% podcast. Now, it doesn't mean you have a top 1% podcast in terms of listenership and audience, but like you've been further than 99% of the podcasters. And this is, I think, a very good
21
representation of Jim.
lifetime?
Lifetime. Yeah. So then, obviously, if you want to optimize, you need to like try to publish frequently. But yeah,
Not in
you
a
publish
weekend?
21 episodes. Sorry?
Not in a weekend?
That's a challenge, Jay. But hey, if you can release 21 episodes in a weekend, that's solid and you should go for it. But no, that's lifetime. That's lifetime.
How many are there? Do you know how many podcasts?
So I
Roughly?
think because we have the stats from RSS feed, I think it's 4 point something million. So how many podcasts are
Is
there?
it
So the thing is that,
international or domestic? How does that?
yeah. So 4.42 million indexed podcasts worldwide as of 2025. Now, indexed would mean registered on an RSS feed. But obviously, and correct me if I'm wrong here, audience, fact check me. But so what I mean by that is you have lots of podcast format, with a nice video, nice background, nice microphones on YouTube, for instance, which wouldn't be registered, on a RSS feed, so not accounted as a podcast, but still people would consume that as the podcast. So, but the official number is 4.43 million. That's the number of podcasts that are out there, and most of them are inactive. That's the magic
So
or
4,430,000
correct. Yeah, correct.
internationally, rough estimate.
Worldwide, and I don't think that's a rough estimate. That's from Demand Sage, and
Wow.
that's a number that's Backlinko. So like it's documented.
And what
4.43
percentage roughly
million.
has more than 21 episodes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if I can find that easily. Let me check on Backlinko quickly because I know they have good stats
The
usually.
3 episodes, people, that's like most don't get past 3, and you're saying,
Correct.
okay, got it.
So 90% of podcasts don't make it past episode 3, and of those who do, 90% of them don't make it past episode 20. So 21
Wow,
episodes
it goes even
equal
more.
you've beat 99% of the podcast.
Yeah, so okay, so yeah, only 443,000 get to past 3, but 44,300 of that 440.
If we do the math, that's correct.
Get to
That's
that
correct.
21, it gets even smaller.
Yeah.
Are there podcast communities that you that in your tenure that you would recommend, or do you have a philosophy around on that? Because the immediate thought was, do these 44,000 humans get together or do something? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a great one. So you have so first of all, you have different ways of consuming podcasts depending on where you are. I'm going to mainly talk about the US market because this is where I think worldwide the US represents 44% of the podcast listeners. The UK is like below 10%, something like this, and then it's scattered all around the world. But like US is where the biggest podcast market is. And yeah, so the first thing that we can think of and that we can talk about are podcast networks, right? So this is going to be networks of podcasts. So generally like overseen by somebody who's like, hey, let's build a network around podcasts dedicated to entertainment or dedicated to well-being or dedicated to whatever the theme, right? And you're like, hey, come on my network, and what I will do for you is that we will syndicate all the downloads. I will go to advertisers and be like, hey, look, I have those 50 podcasts that get like regrouped, I don't know, 50 million downloads a month, and we're gonna advertise your product on all of those podcasts. So you get, like kind of this group effect. That's the first big community thing that we see. Spotify is organizing quite some events lately, so that's also a way to recruit people. And then you have all the trade shows and events around podcasts for sure. You have the podcast show, you have the I don't remember the name of it in the UK, but like that is going crazy. You have all sorts of awards. I interviewed Adam Shepherd, the one who organizes the UK Podcast Awards, which is like a huge event as well. So yeah, you have lots of communities around podcasts, obviously, and networks are one of them.
Are you, if you were to compare European interest versus American, is it close, different?
So
what's the delta?
yeah, so I
Who's
think
leading?
podcast.
Is that even a thing to ask? If is there one
Yeah,
leading?
100%. So we can. So the fantastic thing about podcasts is that it's not all on one platform, but there are some interesting things. So I'm gonna share my screen here. I know it's disabled. Okay, but I'm gonna walk through some stats. Unless you can give me access to screen sharing,
Yeah,
Jay,
how
that'd
do
be
I?
awesome.
Okay, I think I can do that right here. Actually,
So this would be for people watching this episode in video, but I'm gonna describe it for people listening only on the audio. But like there is a platform, a podcast hosting platform, which is called Buzzsprout, that
should I
releases
make you the
publicly.
host?
No, I think just enabling screen sharing should be enough. I think.
You think I'd learn how to use this by now? Oh,
That's all right.
enable. Oh, yeah. Allow participants. You. No, I don't see where it says that. Do I? Oh,
So if you
maybe
try
I
and
do.
share your screen yourself, will you see something like allow for everybody or something like that?
Oh, yeah. Thanks. There you
Nice.
go. That's real time value, people. Listen.
Here we go. That's how it's done.
Now I just,
Uh,
yeah, you should be able to do it now.
Cool. Yeah, I'm able to. Can you see my screen, Jay?
Yes. Perfect.
Fantastic. Okay, so people watching this, they'll be able to see the stats live, but I'm gonna
Go
describe
to
it for people
YouTube if you're
listening to it.
listening to this. Go to YouTube to watch this part.
Exactly. So Buzzsprout is one of the biggest podcast hosting platform out there. Podcast hosting platform is basically, if you want to distribute your podcast everywhere, you can either go to Spotify and upload your file. You can go to Apple Podcast, upload your episode. You can go to Amazon Music, upload your episode, or you choose a platform that does everything for you and publishes everywhere. Most of them are free, some are paid for. Buzzsprout is one of them. It's the second biggest hosting platform after Spotify for podcaster. The great thing about Buzzsprout is that each and every month they report on some stats that all the podcasts are getting. The podcast hosted on Buzzsprout, obviously, so it's a representation of the market, but not the whole market. And so the interesting thing here is we see countries and territories of people consuming podcast, and we can see that the US is far, far, far ahead with 44% of the market. The UK with almost 6%, Canada 4.4, Australia 4.3, and then we find the first European country, Germany, but then it's back to Vietnam, Netherlands, Colombia, and so on. So, in comparison, to answer your question, Jay, Europe is very small in terms of
Wow.
podcast audience compared to the US, which is like dominating very, very heavily.
What did that stat say on the bottom? It said something about listening. If you scroll down,
Yes,
it
100%.
was interesting.
So
Yeah. What is this?
this section, so this is gold actually. This is Buzzsprout explaining. Okay, look, within the first 7 days, sorry, of a podcast episode being published, here is how many downloads they get based on their top percentile, the above downloads. So they say that the top 1% of podcasts gets on average 4,706 downloads in the first 7 days of being published. Top 5% represents 1,106 downloads. So that's almost a fifth of that. And then you fall into the top 10%, top 10 fall into top 10, quote unquote, obviously, 468 downloads, top 25%, 112. So what they're
Hmm.
basically saying here is winner takes all. And right
Wow.
now you have some big, very well established podcasts who are also mass market, right? Because that's what we need to think about. But like the Joe Rogan of this world, the Stephen Bartlett, the Chris Williamson, the Cole Herdaddy, the and so on and so forth. All those podcasts which are like attracting the most audience actually get 90-95% of the audience. What's interesting though, if people are thinking about starting podcasts but getting discouraged by this stat, is that if you go on very specific niches, which is always what we recommend doing when you start a podcast, even if your audience is like 50 downloads per episode, if it's the absolute right target and a very narrow niche, you can still make good money, you can still monetize your business, and so on and so forth. So this shouldn't
That's a
discourage
great
you from
point.
launching a podcast.
I have a
Mm.
question about, let's look at episode duration and publish.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the term leading indicator, lagging indicator? Or
I'm not familiar with them, but it's in the
just
name, I guess. But Jay, happy for you to
think
explain me.
like
So,
maybe you're curious. Oh, so yeah. So just to say, uh, one is behavioral, one is outcome. So my
okay.
question to you is, in your experience, does the volume and quality, so episode duration, that to
Hmm.
me, I interpret that as have a relationship with quality, or like
Hmm.
what the listener's experience of the episode would affect
Hmm.
duration. And what my question to you is, what so episode downloads that maybe comes later, and episode duration and publishing, that's what we can do something about. Like I don't have any control over the outcome, but I have responsibility over what I do, what I don't do. So, what are your thoughts on the publishing and the duration stats?
Man, this is so good. I don't know if you're so I didn't know the specific metrics, but you really make me think about the first personal development book that I read, first ever, which was Seven Habits of Highly it's not successful people, it's highly effective people. I
Yeah,
really recommend
Covey.
this book.
Wow, what a great book.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And he talks about exactly what you just said here, which is the environment and the zone of influence. I've read it in French, so I'm not too sure what the English term
Oh,
here
that's
is, but
cool.
like there are some things that you just cannot control. Like the weather, you cannot control. But some people really get depressed when it's raining, and they're like, "What are you gonna do about it? You cannot do anything about it." So don't focus on this. Yes, the sun like improves mood, tan, and so on. Cool. But like, what are the things that you can control? What's your zone of influence? And what you just described here is spot on environment versus zone of influence when it comes to what you do with your podcast.
Is that
With the
duration mean that's not listening time? That's how long the episode is?
correct, you're correct. Yeah.
So 15% of podcasts are over an hour,
Exactly.
according to that.
And yeah,
Wow.
and so if I can double down on that, Jay, what's super interesting is that the most popular podcasts, so Joe Rogan, Andrew Huberman, Stephen Bartlett, Cole Hurley, are all more than 60 minutes. And if anything, Joe Rogan, who has the like
Yeah,
by
yeah.
far the most successful podcast, his episode length average is 2 hours and 38 minutes. So it's very interesting to see that the most successful podcasts actually have very lengthy episodes. But the whole challenge is to keep people hooked and keep people on listening to your
Do you ever
podcast.
see a picture of the iceberg?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
an
of course.
iceberg?
With
What
like,
could there be a correlation between time, longevity, and how deep one goes in the water? Like, if I'm a fan, I'm a super fan.
mhm.
I am. There's got to be like a J curve. You know, you're a finance guy, so like, you know the rule of 72. You know,
Exactly,
the rate of return divided by 72. So 24
exactly.
that's money doubles every 3 years. 10
Yep.
doubles every 7.2 years. I don't know.
Compounded
Just there's
interest.
a they're longer. There's a J curve at some point. It's like
Yeah,
an iceberg. The other thing I want to ask, did that say
it's an exponential.
2% of podcasts were going
Mhm.
out every day?
Yeah, so that's right. Wait, sorry,
Volume
let me pull out the
wise?
stats again.
Fascinating.
So 7% of podcasts publish an episodes every day or every other day. Yeah. This will be mainly news-related podcasts. You have lots of news media, news company who release daily episodes just to keep news updated, right?
Wow. Oh, question. The gym analogy. You mentioned discipline, having a
Yeah,
plan. Are there
yeah,
disciplines you found because you actually advise and help launch and monetize as well through
correct.
GHA marketing podcasters? Anyone that's listening to this that has one that's stuck or maybe just more proactive, like Stephen Covey, you're somebody to talk to.
Mhm.
So, question about are there disciplines that you have observed in your best either client relationships or colleague relationships in the podcasting
Yeah.
world? Disciplines that lead to them to have a successful
Hmm.
where they don't quit and they start really getting traction.
Yeah. So back to your iceberg analogy as well, right? The most successful podcasts are the ones that have been going on for the longest time, like period. Now you can get certain degree of success within a short period of time, right? That's what we strive to do for our clients. But the longer you wait, the more it will compound because it's a networking machine. It's a getting introduced to more people. It's a getting through more doors thanks to the podcast. It's getting an audience that compounds, that accumulates goodwill with you as well, right? Because they are getting like value from you each and every week, each and every month, each and every year. And so the longer you wait, the more your podcast will have an impact if you do things right. So back to your point, Jay. The number
Wow.
one thing, and that's something we weren't focusing at the beginning, actually. The number one thing that we do when we start working with a podcaster, right? And that I recommend to any podcaster, by the way, you don't have to work with me to do that. It's stop publishing content that you think is good. How many conversations? I talk to about 550 podcasters each and every year, like 2 per day. And the
Oh,
number
wow.
one thing that I hear the most is like, I know I have great content, but I just need to market it more, to get it more out there. And I'm like, who tells you have a great content? And that hurts for a lot of people, by the way. But the whole thing is, we think we release great content, and maybe it is great content, but maybe it's also content that nobody cares about. So the number one thing that we do is let's do a research. Let's select a topic. Back to the importance of being niche down, of like targeting something. You're talking about culture, right? I think that's a very good niche. Other people might talk about, I don't know, HVAC or like plumbing. We have clients in this. That's why I'm coming from the top of my head. And then do an in-depth research of what is it that people within your niche want to listen to, want to consume of. What is it that they're asking? And how do you do that? Because I don't want this to be wishy-washy. You go on Google Trends, you type in your 2, 3 main keywords, and you see, is it a growing trend? What are the associated keywords that we stick to that? What are the questions that people ask themselves and ask Google? Google Keywords Planner, all those are free tools, by the way. Reddit communities, like go into a Reddit community or multiple Reddit communities that cater to your niche, and you see what people talk about, what people ask, what people need help on. Quora ask questions as well, gold mines of knowledge there. Go on YouTube, type in your keyword, see what the most popular videos are about. Like, do your research about what is it that people want to listen to, so that you can position your content accordingly, and you know that you have content that will at least be of interest in the title. Then you need to have great episode. But that's the first stone. And then to add two to that, Jay, I would say consistency, 100%. Like, you need to keep on going. And the most successful podcasters will tell you this. Like, in the first 6 months, Chris Williamson talks about this. They get zero downloads, like zero. Alex Hormozy, somebody that I deeply respect, is like, yeah, for the first 3 years, I was getting 3,000 downloads a month. And now I'm at more than 1 million. But it's like, things take time. So consistency, keep on going. At least once a week is the way to go, in my opinion. Twice a month is the bare minimum, but depending on your niche, you can do that. And then audio quality. At the end of the day, you're an audio only format. You can have video, but like, if the audio isn't good, people are just gonna, they're just gonna drop off, and they are gonna be like, it's not easy and nice to listen to. So those are the three things I would say. End of my long-winded answer.
What are things people do without maybe even recognizing that are destructive behaviors in the beginning?
Oh, this is such a good question. Oh, what are things that people do that are destructive behaviors without realizing it? So I think for sure, grabbing a mic and talking about what they feel like talking about, not having a structure. I'm not really pro like fully scripted episodes, right? Like, the way you approach this, Jay, is my way of doing things. I love it. You're like, hey, send me a pre-brief about what you do, send me a few links I can look at, and we'll just go with the flow. And I love this because that gives a real natural conversation. Back in our corporate treasury 101 days, we used to script everything because we were talking to like managing directors and so on of banks and so on, and they want a very polished communication. But we still tried to make the conversation, like entertaining and a bit insightful and having a banter still. So that's one thing. Like, being prepared. Like, what's the formula? An ounce of pre is worth a pound of post. Like, the more you prepare at the beginning, the least you'll have to make up for everything afterwards. And like, the least editing will be needed, and the least like communication will be needed, because your content will be great. So like, prepping for the episodes right, and making sure that you have a structure and you know what you're going to talk about, and you know what point you're going to hit on, thanks to your preparation and the research as well, is one of the things that I would like really insist on. And the
So
second thing is,
the lack
go
of
ahead.
prep you've seen.
Exactly. Yeah. 100%. Lack of prep is killing episodes, and quitting too early. Like, literally quitting too early is like, oh, it's my 10th episode and I'm only getting 10 downloads a month. And you're like, yeah, you're starting a podcast. You're probably not marketing it right. You're probably not getting each and every listener to bring friends because the content isn't good enough. But like, don't quit. Improve each and every episode. Re-listen to your episodes. Like, what can I do better? Oh, here, I didn't follow up on that super insightful answer from my guest. How can I do more? Like, and to me, it feels, Jay, that this is an exercise that you've practiced, right? Because you're like, oh, tell me more about this. Like, hey, we didn't plan that. Actually, let's go there. Or the gym analogy, like, it was in the back of your head. You let me finish my sentence. Be like, let's go back there because it's interesting. That's what makes a great interview, in my opinion.
You were mentioning another thing that so consistency can undermine it, lack of preparation. Anything else that you've observed
So,
people do in the first year, even?
so I would have said audio quality, but this has evolved, also thanks to the fact that you have amazing tools nowadays to just, in post production, even if you have the crappiest audio, you can polish it with AI tools. We use Adobe Audio Enhance, which is a fantastic tool. I think Riverside has this function. Descript has this function. So you have lots of free or very cheap tools that help you get a much better audio. I wouldn't necessarily bank all of it if you really want a quality production, but if you're starting, it's really good. Like, it will get rid of the background noise, make your voice a bit more polished. Don't abuse the enhancement because then you'll sound too robotic. But that's a very good way to have a good enough audio, at least, because you have some people like podcast 5 years ago was like, some people, you were like, how do you expect people to listen to this? Like, it's horrible to listen to. But now I feel it's much less of a problem thanks to all the tools. Yeah.
Um, did you want to be in business young because you studied sales and business management? Did you want to be an entrepreneur, or were you perceiving that, hey, I'm going to climb the ranks of these large financial institutions?
Oh man, that's a deep one. So both. I was like, oh, I don't come from a bad background, but like lower middle class, let's say, with quite indebted parents. So didn't have much, but I was like, I'm gonna climb the corporate ladder, which is what I did. So like step by step, started in retail banking, then went into corporate banking, so Societe Generale for the ones wondering, then PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I was like, and I was doing
Amazing
well as well.
company.
Yeah, I know it's cool. It's cool. Thank you, man.
Very
And
successful company.
yeah, those are big corporations. But you also understand that, I mean, the bigger the company, the more of just of like one of the additional. Not that you're just a number, but like you see what I mean. You're part of a big machine. But in the meantime, and I started this very early with one of my friends when we were still studying, I launched, I think, 5 or 6 businesses or like business ventures that completely failed, but that also gave me a taste for like, hey, this challenging thing that, you get really a lot of gratification from if you succeed is really cool. And I knew I wanted to do something a bit different than the normal corporate ladder. But I needed to prove to myself first that I could make it in the corporate ladder, which is why I think it took me that long to go full time and full speed on entrepreneurship.
I'm asking you this because I'm curious what this could, for our listeners, for us,
Hmm.
educated, highly educated, work in great companies,
Yeah.
and you start a podcast with best friend on an
Hmm.
important topic, underserved, and now you're helping all these businesses as well with their podcast. What is what is changing that these big companies may not even be figuring out? Like what it could be behind that big company not saying, "Look at this
Mm.
young man. Let's get behind him."
Yeah.
Maybe you know what I'm saying? That Schopenhauer said, "Every man limits his vision of the world for his own field of vision." So, what about our culture today, business culture?
Mm.
What, because yeah. So, there's something I'm trying to scrape at here, but
Jay, I mean, you ask awesome questions, man. First of all, let me tell you that because you go and find the thing that is hard to spot, but then you're like, hey, there is something more here. And the way you ask the question is like it's so spot on. The first idea of my podcast, Corporate Treasury 101, I actually went to the PwC management. I was
wow.
like, guys, there is something here that I'd like to explore. And it was like, brushed out of the table very quickly. It was like, yeah, sure, but like focus on what you're here to do. So like a junior analyst work, which is basically aligning cells on Excel and aligning items on the slide as well, which is part of the training, right? I get that. I'm like,
For
you're
80
so
hours,
spot on.
probably.
Yeah, on the nice weeks, but yeah, that's right. And I was like, I was really like, you know what? Fine, I'll do it myself. And for the first 6 months, I really got laughed at by the PwC teams. Not in a bad, bullish way, but like, oh yeah, you're still with your podcast. Oh, we wonder who of the two of you is like not really, not really aware of what corporate treasury is because is it Hussam or is it you? Like, a bit salty. But then everything shifts when the thing starts to succeed, and it's Mr. Beast who says, um, "People call you crazy until you succeed, and then they call you a genius." And you're like, but that's not now that I need the support. It was like for the first 3 years where nobody
Yeah,
was rooting
that's
for me.
eerie. That people may not recognize this, but that's a Mr. Beast. That's a Schopenhauer too.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're
Arthur,
right.
man. I'm sorry, but
You're right.
that's
No,
like
you're right.
eerie that you're so
Yeah.
you were doubted. The corporation didn't get it.
So they didn't get it, and so I reflected on this because I still want to answer your question, which is at first I was like, in your face, like look at me now. But then I was like, big corporations are not here to take big amount of risks, right? And it's another Alex Hormozzi's quote, which is people become rich by taking high amount of risk with small amount of money, but people stay rich by taking small amount of risks with high amounts of money. And I think you have to see corporate business the same way. Like a structure like PwC is not architectured to bank on a 6 month junior associate who wants to start a podcast and revolutionize or whatever you want to call it the marketing of that specific department, right? Like there is one chance in 1,000, in 1,000,000 maybe that this actually pays off. So they are not meant to let people take this risk. So And that's something I'm a bit more at peace with now, because I'm like, corporations are not made to take this kind of risk. They provide a frame, a context. They limit the amount of risk that an employee takes, right? That's what an employee is. And it's not a good or a bad thing, by the way. It's just, you're an employee. You're here for, guaranteed safety, guaranteed paycheck. And, in order to get that, you make a lot of trade-offs. You trade
Mm.
off the fact of like having the liberty of doing whatever you want from wherever you want, deciding how much you pay yourself this month if you have a flourishing business. But that's a trade-off, and I think corporations just provide this framework, this environment where you have to make a trade-off between liberty, freedom, potentially high reward, right, with high risk, versus steady income.
So high risk, low
Mm-hmm.
money
Mm-hmm.
versus lot of money, low risk,
Yeah.
different paradigm.
Yeah.
So, in essence, is that where the opportunity therein lies? On the small bank or a small business competing with the big, I
Yeah.
can take a low money, partner with you,
Yeah.
higher risk, and beat them. So,
Yeah. And I think the only missing piece in the equation, Jay, is truck ton of work. Truck ton of work, because you're going to take high amount of risk with small amount of money, but that's not going to be enough. You also need to put the work in, right? If and that's so that's a Kobe Bryant approach, which is like, if I want to beat the people who are in the league for the last 10 years and who've trained like 10 more years than me, if I just train as much as them, I will never beat them. If I train twice as much as them, maybe I'll beat them, but they will be at the end of their career anyways. But if I train 3 times harder, then in 5 years' time, I have a chance. And Kobe Bryant is, may he rest in peace, like the legend of the basketball that he is now. But just because he worked that much more, I think that's it.
how important does the plan play in for our listeners that have aspirations for the podcast?
Yeah. Oh, that's another great question. So here, I love Gary Vee's approach, which is post every day for 6 months and see what happens. But it's not just posts every day for 6 months and, like, don't change anything. It's actually post for an entire week. Look at your 7 posts. What's the one that stood out the most? What did you precisely do in this one? What can you learn? What did you not do, or what did you do in the one that performed the least? How can you eliminate that for your next post whatsoever? And do this every week for 6 months. It's not just, okay, my plan is to post for 6 months. It's like each and every week, iterate, learn, look at the data, do more of what seemed to be working. And eventually you'll have a large sample enough to be able to say, like, okay, the top 10% of my content is having this, and this piece in it. So I need to replicate that. And then on the next batch, you'll also have another 10% outlier that you can learn from and iterate. And if you do actually do that at the end of the 6 months, you have exploded. So I think for
Do the
podcasts, it's pretty
activity,
similar. Do the
consistent.
activity.
Go ahead.
No, you're right, Jay. So do the activity, be consistent, but look back as well. Look at, okay, we did that. We released 4 episodes this month. This topic clearly hit home because we have like 3 times the amount of monthly listeners that we usually get, and people stayed till the end. We have a client like this. We're completely flabbergasted by the stats, but you have the retention rate, right? So where do people drop within the episodes? And it's hard to get 100% retention rate, but good podcasts are steady between 80 and 90% retention rate, meaning when somebody starts, they finish 90% of them.
Now it makes sense why you're come in, because if they're doing it, if their vertical of competence is sock manufacturer, that's a different
Love the niche.
context to think. You're helping them think and reflect on what's working and not working. When I say you, I mean your company, GHA.
100%.
The sock
100%.
manufacturer needs to focus on the socks. Or
Yeah.
thoughts? Or, I don't know.
Yeah, that's it. And they have the expertise, right? So what we're gonna come and do typically, and what you can reproduce at home if you want to start a podcast is, okay, what's the playbook of launching, growing, marketing, and eventually monetizing a successful podcast? What's the playbook? What needs to be true? But then you for sure need to understand what your audience wants. Where are you catching them? How are you catching them? How long do they stay? Oh, we noticed that we released an episode on like actually the type of wool that we use for our socks, but nobody listens to that. However, we had a discussion around the most popular socks color during summer or during winter, and we found out that and this episode exploded. Oh, actually, people are more interested into the fashion aspects of the socks than the way it's like manufactured. Just throwing a random example out there. Maybe it's the other way around, but that's what I mean. To you, your content might be super valuable for somebody who's like deep into the weeds of how to manufacture socks, but that's not what your audience wants to listen to. So you need to apply the playbook, but then iterate and learn constantly from it so that you can make progress and actually reach more and more people. And then eventually you can launch a trousers podcast and a t-shirt podcast and so on, because you understand how it needs to be done within your specific niche. So you're spot on.
What are some of the fruit or the results that you've seen from businesses that adopt this medium?
Mm. So there are so many. Yeah, that's a great one. There are so many examples. So the first thing that we say is today, and you thinking and listening to this right now, think about the way that you purchase stuff, right? Right now, information is everywhere. Like you can literally Google something and find the answer to your question. You can literally ask ChatGPT even and have like a breakdown of how it came up with this answer. So like information is not the crux anymore. People buy from people, not from company, first of all, but they buy from people they like, they trust, and they see they're going to get more value from than what they're actually going to pay. That's the base assumption. Next, you want to, okay, how do we actually embrace that, and how do we create a channel like a podcast where we create that bond with our ideal listener, with our ideal clients, where we showcase expertise, bring value in an entertaining manner, right? So that people actually get the value from us. And how do we establish ourselves in the market as the authority, as the trustworthy brand, and as the brand that can bring them value? So it's a huge branding exercise. That's for the foundation. But then if you set up your funnel correctly around the podcast, and we can go into details if you'd like, Jay, but I want to keep it succinct.
Yeah, that's a master class.
Exactly.
Next
So
time.
exactly. So the whole idea is just, okay, how do we set up the podcast in our marketing mix, in our funnel, so that anybody consuming a piece of content can be prompted at some point towards taking the next step and becoming a lead. So we've seen clients of ours like getting 276 leads in a B2B space in the first month and signing 85 clients. We have other people like high ticket coaches who get 30 leads the first month, 40 the second month. We have clients who are optimizing for sponsorship deals who are signing like absolutely, I still don't know how we did that, but like outrageous amount of sponsorship money thanks to the podcast because they position themselves right. We have people becoming the reference into their niche, therefore being invited to all the conferences, and big companies paying high money to just get their advice or get their name stamped next to that person. So like the outcome of podcast can be amazing, though it will take time, it will take effort, and it will take consistency. But the upside is huge. And also because it's a growing market. Back to our start at the beginning of the episode. 1 billion blogs, 4 million podcasts, most of them inactive. Like, what are we waiting
Last
for?
question. What have you learned about yourself from this process?
That's a great one. I'm thinking about posting a LinkedIn post around this. Good things take time. Like Corporate Treasury 101, we were in a rush. So we started interviewing guests, and they were like, okay, we're going to be making like 5 figures a month with this podcast very, very quickly. It took much more time than we thought. But also because we had no idea what we were doing at the beginning, right? So now with a certain playbook, it can go faster. But the whole idea is good things take time. Like you need to be in a hurry of taking action, but you need to be very patient with the results. And another quote from Alex Hormozi that I love is the most successful entrepreneurs are the ones who can keep on going without seeing the results of their labor for the longest period of time. Because again, it compounds. And the more effort you put in, if you track and measure properly, right? Because if you shout into an empty, I don't know what the expression here is, but nobody will listen to you. But the whole idea is things take time. Good things take even more time. So like patience, consistency, and the strive of trying to do better each and every time is priceless in podcast, and I think in life in general. So that's what he taught me.
Hmm.
Yeah.
If our listeners want to get in touch with you, continue a relationship, maybe hire your company even,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
fastest way to get in touch with you.
Fastest way, Guillaume Jouvencel on LinkedIn. I'm posting every day, interacting a lot there. And ghapodcast.com, our website. Go and check it out. You'll be prompted if you want to take the next step. And if not, we have tons of free resources out there. No opt-in needed. We believe in giving value. So just check it out. GHA Podcast, Guillaume Jouvencel. You'll find us.
If you're listening to this, please share this with a friend that you know is clearly, they talk every day about their podcast and they're about to hit a wall and they can't see. They're going 120 miles an hour into a brick wall. Be a good friend. Share it with them. Leave us a review in the Culture Matters podcast, and we will see you. Oh, go ahead. You want to say something?
I just want to finish on something, Jay. Sorry, I don't meant to interrupt you, but I'm like, I've
Please.
done a lot of podcast episodes. I've done a lot of stuff. And the quality of the questions that you ask is really outstanding. I'm thinking about somebody who's called Daniel Stillman, who is the host of The Conversation Factory, who I also had an amazing conversation with. But like, you really recognize great podcast hosts by the quality of the questions they ask, not only the ones that they have written before the episode, but the ones they ask in follow-ups. And I really had a great time. So, Jay, amazing host. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm honored. If you're
Of
listening to
course,
this,
man.
please listen to what Guillaume just said about me a couple times and share this with a friend. And, yeah. And man, thanks so much. And we'll see you next time on the Culture Matters podcast.